And here we go. All right. Thanks everybody for showing up. This is our special ad hoc champion call from the SIGHPC education chapter. We have Steve Gordon going to talk about that. And I hope that this is super beneficial to everyone. So thanks for being here. We are recording, and I put a link to a Google Doc for notes in the chat box. And I will just turn it right on over to Steve.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you all for joining today. I'm aside from being Secretary Treasurer of the SIGHPC Education Chapter, I'm a Professor Emeritus at Ohio State University and currently doing some part-time work at the Ohio Supercomputer Center. And some of you may know me from when I helped to run the Exceed Education program a few years ago. So today, though, I'd like to talk about the education chapter of the ACM. This is a virtual chapter. It was actually the first virtual chapter, meaning it isn't associated with a particular city, but it has as its purpose a widespread idea of promoting interest and knowledge of applications in high-performance computing. And so you can see that what we're trying to do is we have a really broad community, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But that community is has many kinds of things going on in terms of training, education, and so on. And the whole purpose of the chapter is not to duplicate those efforts, but to try to bring the community together to share information and to share those kinds of efforts to make all of our work a bit more efficient. So you can sort of see the main ideas that we're trying to get across, and this will be also reflected in the applications and communities we're going to talk about. Just a little bit about the organization. There are 5 official elected officers: a chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer. I misspelled that, but I'll fix it. There's 2 at-large members, but aside from that formal structure, we also have several ex officio members that are active members that are contributing to chapter activities in various ways, and they meet with the elected officers regularly to help coordinate those activities. So I mentioned that we're trying to reach a broad community, and I know all of you know quite a bit about the community as participants. So it includes faculty and students from K-12 to graduate school. It includes the HP centers and their staff from individual institutions, nationally funded projects such as Exceed, but across multiple nations. So it also includes people from PRACE and some other supercomputing centers in Europe and in Great Britain. There are people from research centers and government labs, and even people from industry that provide and use HPC services. So our whole idea is to provide mechanisms for widespread participation and try to avoid duplication of efforts for everything that these folks do that overlaps in some way. So when we first began the chapter, which is now around, I think, 4.5 years ago, we started with some things like webinars, some participation in conferences, and we began to set up some communication channels like a website and blog and social media, which I'll share a bit more about later. But more recently, what we tried to do is to form some standing committees that broaden the participation in chapter efforts. And these are 4 working committees on 4 sort of overlapping subjects, but each has its own core. And the committee participation is open to all who are interested. So they cover quite a few people from all over the world. And an important thing is to stress here that everybody gets paid the same amount for participating, and the same amount as the officers, which is nothing. So it's an all-volunteer organization, but we all participate because we're interested in trying to benefit the community as a whole. And then hope we can get some of you interested in that as well if you're not already participating. So here are the 4 committees. There's an Education Content Committee, and its focus is really looking at training and education materials and trying to think about them from a sharing standpoint? Can we put some sort of curation on existing materials that relate to computational science and high performance computing so that users, staff, whoever is interested in these materials can find them more easily rather than going to multiple providers. So it's sort of a cross-index to things that might be going on in Exceed and Prace at various universities. So this is a challenging thing. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The second is the workshop committee, and they're in charge of coordinating and managing the development and implementation of in-person and virtual events, and that's fairly straightforward. The outreach committee is really focused on arranging and promoting various communication mechanisms, and so it works with all the other committees as they work forward on their activities to try to publicize them and keep people involved. And finally, there's the Computational Science Education Committee, which is really more focused on education and the integration of computational science into the curricula at various levels of education from K-12 up to graduate school, and trying to coordinate those kinds of activities. So let me talk about each of these in a bit more in turn. So as I said, the Educational Content Committee has as its main goal a potential repository of available education and training material on computational science and high-performance computing. And so what's required in order to make that happen would be some kind of process for review and updates of materials and a taxonomy for cataloging and retrieving those materials. So that committee has started working by looking at existing efforts. I know there were some efforts on the HPC University site, which was an extension of one of the national digital science libraries, looking at what they've done to see if there's something that as a committee for this chapter that we could take advantage of and begin to organize that a bit better. So again, the goal is to make it easier to find materials suited for different stakeholders, and also really to help avoid duplication of efforts. So I'm sure all of you have seen that there are maybe dozens of tutorials on MPI or OpenMP. And so a lot of people are duplicating effort, putting those together, and wouldn't it be nice if we could get that down to maybe half a dozen instead of several dozen, and then devote the additional effort that we might have spent on updating the 24 of those to doing some more advanced topics that would help the community in other ways. So that's the overall goal of this committee. The workshop committee is really to look at conferences worldwide and to participate in those where it's relevant to the chapter's goals. And so they make proposals for sessions at target workshops and organize presenters and call for presentations. So I'm gonna try to see if I can show you this. Is Nitin on by any chance?
I am on.
Oh, you are. So Nitin, I'm gonna try to show this web page here in a second, if I can get it to the right screen. Whoops. Now PowerPoint stopped working, so bear with me a second. My machine just partially crashed. And so if we go to the events page can you see the web page now?
Now we don't see anything.
Uh-oh.
You stopped sharing, I think.
Okay, hold on.
And I'm going to put the link to the Google Notes in the chat box again. And I put links to the SIGHPC Education Chapter website and the link to the committee's page on there.
Okay.
And also to encourage people, because these committees are still they haven't been around that long. So if you're thinking about participating, know that you're still getting in on the fairly early stages, and I'm sure they can use more help probably.
All right, now are you seeing the event screen?
No, now we see your SIGHPC folder.
Oh, sorry. Try again. Now what you got?
Now we see the events page. And
Okay,
Mitten
cool.
put a link in the chat box.
So there have been 2 calls for papers, one at the PERC conference and one at SC18. And then you want to say a few minutes take a few minutes to talk about these calls for papers?
Sure. So per conference, it's the immediate call for papers. It's going to be deadline is May 18th, and it's focused on mostly the practices and models for teaching and learning HPC topics and course materials. So if you have developed any assessment, any training material with respect to HPC, and you are thinking of publishing and presenting to the major big audience, and this is the venue to go for. Moreover, the thing is, we are also looking for extended abstract. So, if you have done it's a work in progress, there's still chances for getting the work to be shared with other folks in PERC, because since PERC is a kind of a small scale organization with respect to sharing your results and your features with respect to mostly computing needs, right? And then that's the PERC conference. But so we intend to do like 2 activities in a year. One is a PERC, which is going to be during June, July, and then the major event, which will be the second major meet where we're going to have more international audience. It's going to be SC again. That's a 5th workshop on best practices in HPC training education, where we focus more on training and education, but more extensive review process, and there's a lot of other needs required for the paper submission, like reproducibility, because since we are trying to avoid a lot of people doing the same amount of work, we want researchers to share not only their written content, but also how they got to that point. So to share the code or some kind of computational algorithms which can be reproduced, and there's not replication of the same material again and again. So that's the basic goal. So if you want to submit, SC call is open. So now we are taking submission for both of these calls. And if you have any questions, please do email us. You see all the people in the committee. Anybody will respond. And if you're trying to publish the paper or trying to submit a paper, you can. And SC18, we have multiple options. We have papers, we have extended talks, and we also have demos. So if you have a demos, like you've done some tutorial and if you want to frame a small tutorial with a demo, that's also presentable, and you can submit a 2-page abstract, and that's a good candidate for demos. So we're taking not only just papers, but extended abstract for lightning talks and demos for SC18.
So if you go to this web page, the calls have all the details about how to submit and all the things that Nitin talked about. So they've been a very active committee getting going here. Now I'm going to try to go back to slides. So let me see if that's where this gets. Are you seeing the slides now?
Yeah, it worked. Outreach.
Oh, wow. Two things in a row. So the obviously the outreach, as you just saw by looking at that page, is promotes workshops and webinars. What we were trying to do is to track and communicate other events of interest to the community. There are a number of ongoing efforts. So there's a blog, and there's a link to the blog there, and we're trying to get people that are doing a variety of things to write a couple pages, just blog entries, which are informative to the community. So the last one that was entered was to talk about the Exceed badging program. We have a number of other people lined up to do blogs, but we're interested in blogs on any related topics because we'll classify them into things like training or education or various kinds of efforts. So these are just 1 or 2 page summaries of ongoing activities that are of interest to the community. You can see that we have links to various social media outlets, and we use these to publicize a variety of events going on. And there's also, we also have a YouTube channel, and that's where we've posted, if I can go back to the web page here, see if that works. And so if we go to the seminar series here, this shows all of the webinars we've entered in the past, and each one has a YouTube video. So there might be topics of interest to you there that you can go back and look at. And we try to get these webinars going, you know, about a half a dozen times a year, depending on who we can get. And these have been quite useful in as outreach for the community. All right, so that's the one other thing I should mention about the outreach committee. We're currently experimenting with a public calendar, and that calendar would allow anyone who's running a training event, workshop, whatever, that's of interest to the community to post it for acceptance on this sort of community calendar, and that will be shared, you know, widely. So look for an announcement of that. We're still debugging the process, but that should be coming soon, and will be another way that we're trying to outreach to the broader community. Finally, the Computational Science Education Committee is exploring education programs and instructional materials on computational and data science. They're also trying to create an overview of programs for students like internships, summer schools, and hackathon events, and some of those things would be things that would go up on this in this calendar I just mentioned earlier. They're going to undertake a survey of current programs at various academic institutions, and then also hope to foster the exchange of educational materials. So there is some overlap with the other content committee. The difference is that this is focusing probably a bit more on academic programs, and the content committee is slanted a bit more towards training, but there are major overlaps. And so we're trying to coordinate between these committees. Okay, so now you're saying to yourself, how do I join? Currently the committees have 2 co-chairs and an initial set of members, but more members are welcome. And in order to join a committee, what you need to do is just send an email to officers@sighpceducation.acm.org, indicating which committee you might be interested in. And by the way, if you go to the front page of sighpceducation.acm.org, there's a link which describes in much more detail the charges for each of the 4 committees. So you might want to go look at that as well. So if you send an email, just indicate your contact information and which committees you're interested in joining, and we will put you in charge with the current chairs to get you started. Also, by the way, we're looking for some student participation. We've had 1 or 2 students that have inquired, but if you have students on your campuses that would be interested in getting a bit of service to the profession and learning more about this, we would welcome their participation in these committees and these activities as well. Lastly, let me put in a plug for those who haven't joined the chapter to actually formally join the chapter. That gets you on our mailing list so that you get notified about all these kinds of things. It's not very expensive. Annual dues are $10 for professionals and $5 for students. And again, on our web page under the membership section, there's a link so that you can join the chapter yourself. And those of you who are members should have received, just as an aside, a link to vote for our new slate of officers, which is going on now. And just a reminder to those of you members, to please do that if you haven't done so. So that's kind of an overview of the chapter and all the things going on. And I would be glad to entertain questions or comments at this point.
I'll start.
Okay.
Well, I probably know the answer, but I'll pretend I don't. So as far as like the events that the chapter has, I noticed a lot of these you share the YouTube videos and stuff like that. And I know from past events that you welcome anyone to attend, even non-members. Is that going to continue, I suppose?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, there's no way to screen members from non-members, but so we publish for any of those events. We not only publish them, send it out to an email to our email list for members, but we also list them through one or more of the social media channels. So if you watch us from one of the social media chapters, even if you don't want to join, you're certainly welcome to attend any of those webinars. Other questions?
There's one in the chat box from Marisa. Is it just members that can vote for officers?
Yes, only members can vote. So you have to have been a member last week in order to vote. It's the vote's gone out for this year, but if you want to vote for officers next year, join the chapter. The officers serve for a year at a time and can only serve in the same role for 2 years in a row, and then ACM wants us to go and find other people to serve. So that sort of keeps things moving on the chapter.
And it's true, you don't have to join SIGHPC itself or ACM to join this, so it's a super good deal.
Yeah, you don't have to. Right. The chapter memberships is independent of the SIGHPC larger group, and it's somewhat independent of ACM. So you don't have to, you don't have to join those other things. Those are considerably more expensive. Although the SIGHPC is what, $30 a year or something like that?
Yeah, it's still a pretty good deal, and then you get a big discount on your SC registration.
Right. Yeah, that's
it pays for itself very quickly.
Yeah. ACM is a bit pricier. It's in the hundreds, but but then you get other kinds of benefits as well. And you can see here at the I'll go to the home page. Here's the link to the standing committees and all of the social media links. And there's also a link to the blog and forum and our current list of training education resources, which is sort of the starting point of the content committee to begin adding stuff and doing some curation.
So if someone has a question, feel free to butt in, because otherwise I'll have questions, because I always do. So Steve, you're founded this group, right? Is that correct? Several years ago?
That's right. I was the person who founded it, and I served as chair for a couple of terms, and as secretary treasurer. I'm currently a candidate for the chair again. Actually, so it was quite a journey the first time, because ACM had never had a virtual chapter, and none of their procedures were suited to having a virtual chapter. So we broke some new ground there, and I think there are a few virtual chapters now.
Nice.
But it's worked out quite well, I think.
How many members are there?
And the voting list that went out to 157 people.
Oh, wow.
And that's growing, because I think last year at the same time we had about 65, so it's more than double, I think, the last year.
That's great.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited about the new committees and how active they are. And
yeah, I think that's energized everybody quite a lot. They all have very distinct things that they can do, and people can donate a little bit of time and still get something out of it.
mm-hmm. Oh, here's a question from Rob. Is the intention to continue updates and active curation of the resource list? Because that would be a very useful page to be able to link to.
Yes, that's the intention of that committee, is to have a resource list. I mean, it would be, the resource list would be not only updated, but eventually it might become a searchable database with various ways to search by topic, by level of expertise, attended audience, those kinds of things. So it'll take them a while to get there, but the first round will be to take the current resource list, update it with some more recent materials, and puts at least a few tags on it so that it's a little bit more distinct about what each of the things is about.
He says, thanks. There are many efforts to put together lists like this, but this one has the potential to be one of the best. Yeah. Oh, and feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to use your voice. Scott says, for the repository, we want to know from everyone, what are you looking for? That's a good question. We're looking for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've found that everyone's looking for something slightly different, so we're trying to put together something that's useful across multiple, for multiple purposes. But
Scott, do you want to say a few words about what kinds of ideas that you all are working with so far on this? I think it's a pretty popular idea.
Well, Julie Mullen's leading that effort, and she's wanting to do a survey of the community to kind of crisp it up. I think as she's been leading this content committee, she's learned quite a bit about needs from the community, but the more input we get, the better the outcome will hopefully be. So send your suggestions and ideas for what should be in the repository to Julie or anyone else on the committee.
Do you know if they're going to have a method where it's, I guess it'll be vetted to some degree, but like...
Yeah, I think they're talking about an idea of having reviewers that at least post reviews of materials.
Like Goodreads for, where people can rank or give it stars and reviews or something, or is it just going to be the committee that is reviewing?
No, I think they'll probably want participation from a wider audience.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, agreed. I think we want everyone to be able to voice their input onto the quality of the materials that they are using.
And if you have any ideas or suggestions and which you can frame in like a 1-page or 2-page abstract, it would be a good candidate for lightning talk for any of the conferences which you just mentioned.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any ideas. I have ideas on what it should look like, but I think I've talked to Julie enough to know that she already knows.
And I think a lot of people have a lot of experience with different repositories, and I think we can understand what do people find most useful, most beneficial, so we can focus the effort, because we can't do everything, but if we can identify the key priorities, that will help a lot.
To me, the hard part's always been like, what's the kind of the content management system? Like I just mentioned Goodreads because I just seen a review of a book on there, and I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. Or movie review pages and that kind of a infrastructure where it's kind of not too hard for people to put in new resources, and then easy to crowdsource kind of the reviews of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that the committee, I think, is going to investigate is what's the best kind of infrastructure to make that happen.
Right, because otherwise, the $1 million question is ongoing curation, as was brought up.
Right. Absolutely.
And if that's the burden of a very small number of people, it needs to have a lot of participation. And so I think our community is getting so well connected now that I think if it's easy to let people help, they will. Right, everybody?
And I want to throw one thing out that maybe Steve could push back, but Steve's talked about a number of committees that exist already, and they're really ramping up, and I think they're going to have a good impact. But I think it's fair to say if there's a segment of the interests that the committees aren't covering, we're always looking for someone to take the lead on some new area. So we're always looking for new ideas, new opportunities. But don't constrain your thinking to the current opportunities that are out there that Steve talked about.
Yeah, I think, and there's a lot of room for complementary activities because, a lot of the things that the SIGHPC education chapter does and is doing is exciting because they've been kind of discussed amongst the champions in various forms over the years. And so it's these new committees and the coordination and the enthusiasm and the work that's already gone into it is terrific. And I think keeping that momentum going is going to be, I think, easier than in the past somehow. Hopefully.
We hope so. Yes, we hope so. Definitely. Well, if there are no further questions, I hope that we encourage some of you to join the efforts, join the chapter. Is keep in touch with what we're doing because the broader the community we get involved, the easier it will be to get some of these things done. So I appreciate your attention today, and feel free to write me or anyone else that's involved in the chapter if you have further questions or ideas.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And
okay,
thanks.
Dana. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.